May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to Thee, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Please be seated. So as Christians, we often have to defend this story. Do we believe in a God that can walk on water? Sure. Yes. Have you found yourself trying to explain how it could have happened? You're in good company if you have, because a lot of commentators either say this is a story that should have appeared after the resurrection of Jesus. It got misplaced. It's in the wrong spot. They say that. Or they say there's actually some shoals under the water, and it just appears that Jesus is walking on the water. He's actually walking on the shoals. Well, don't believe it. We need a God who can walk on the water. And there's no shoals, and this wasn't an appearance after he died. Matthew has the story in exactly the right place. What's the setup for this story is at the beginning of the feeding of the 5,000, which happened last Sunday, right? We hear that Herod killed John the Baptist and had his head severed and served on a plate to his partygoers. A grisly image. And then immediately we have these two stories, both of which involve Jesus trying to get away and be alone with his God, because he knows that once John the Baptist is killed, his days are numbered. And we know that he goes up to that mountain to be close to his God and to get the strength and power he will need to get through the time ahead. So in the story just preceding this, Jesus got to this coastline that he thought would be abandoned, where he could be alone with his God. And no, there were thousands of hungry people there who wanted to be fed. And remember what happened last week. Jesus didn't feed them. Jesus blessed the bread and gave it to his disciples. He gave it to his disciples, who fed everyone. The disciples fed everyone. And this is following right after that. These two stories have to do with a shift in power, a tremendous shift in power, so that Jesus can go get prepared for what he has to do, which is leave us, and we can get prepared to do what we need to do, which is know that he never leaves us, that he will always be with us. So he goes up to the mountain, and when we see that he goes up to the mountain, it reminds us of things. It reminds us of Moses going up to the mountain to commune with God, to get the 10 Commandments, his face glowing. And he comes down the mountain to lead his people. Another thing Moses does is he leads the people of Israel out of bondage in Egypt through the water to dry land. So we have a mountain and we have water in this reading. Is that a coincidence? No, of course not. Moses could touch the water with his staff and the water separated. And it led the people of Israel to be a community for the first time. They look on this as their foundation story. They walked through the waters, and then Moses touches the waters again, and the waters concave against all of their enemies, splashing over them, drowning them. Their wheels are caught in the mud, remember? They can't get out of the water. All of their enemies are destroyed in the water. And this is what we're told to think about. Elijah also touched the water with his mantle, and the water separated, allowing him and his disciple Elisha to go across on dry land. And he passes the mantle, that's where this expression comes from, he passes it to Elisha, who after Elijah is taken up into the heavens, Elisha can now touch the water with the mantle, and the waters separate. So if Moses has power of God over water, and Elijah has the power of God over the water, what do we expect Jesus to have? Of course he's going to have power over the water. And what does the water represent that he has power over? This is the watery void from which God created order. The watery void is symbolic of everything that we push away, that we don't want to be part of our human character. Every dark fear we've ever had is pushed into our collective unconscious, as Jung calls it. And our collective unconscious is roiling with all these fears that we, sitting in our little church pews, really don't like to talk about. But we can't avoid it today in this particular story, because this is what Jesus is walking over. He's walking over, showing his power and dominance over all of our unruly and unbidden fears. Yes, when I was a little girl, I was terrified of spiders walking over my face. I'm still terrified of spiders. You grow up, you don't leave your fears behind, I'm afraid. You just learn different coping mechanisms. I also was afraid of fire, because everybody told my grandmother if she keeps leaving lit cigarettes around, the house is going to burn down. And who has these giant pitcher ears? I thought the house was going to burn down because my grandmother never stopped smoking. I had nightmares of burning in a house. I still have nightmares of burning in a house. I have nightmares that I'm standing in front of everybody in church with no clothes on. I have nightmares that I didn't do my homework and the test was yesterday and I missed it. And I have these fears that I'm not going to do what I'm supposed to do or I won't be prepared. I have nightmares that the next sentence I say in the sermon will disappear in thin air and I'll be standing up here stammering. And we learn how to cope. I learned how to breathe. I learned how to count on my faith where I didn't think my faith could go. We have these parameters. We say faith is for in here, right? And we have a hard time applying faith to out there. So imagine this as the boat, which is not so hard because that's what this is. We're inside the boat, and we hit a storm where all of these fears that we would rather not talk about come pouring into us like waves through these windows, through the doors, through the choir loft, and we have to face every fear that we have. Our fear of dying and disappearing, that there is no ever after. How many are afraid of that? This is your time to admit it. Your fear of abandonment, that your mother's left you and there's going to be no one to turn on the light in your fears. Or your spouse is leaving before you are. Ultimate fears. Fear of burning, fear of fire, fear of drowning, fear of earthquakes. I lived in California. Fear of being blown off the cliff. The winds were so powerful. One of my houses that I lived in was on a cliff. And the winds were so fierce, I did fear falling off that cliff into the abyss. We're afraid that we're inconsequential, that we don't matter. We're afraid that Jesus is going to everybody else and there's no grace left for us. We're afraid that things will go wrong in the surgery. We're afraid that we will be a burden to our children. On and on and on. We push these fears away so that we don't have to think about them. And this story tells us, stop that. We are here because of our fears. Jesus comes to us in the midst of our fears, and he is that symbol standing on that roiling, dark sea that we need not be afraid. The disciples were lost at sea at night. And at night, we can imagine that the waves, they couldn't see for the black of the night. And they were the boat was turning around. They didn't know which way they were going. And they were crying out for Jesus to save them. And this time, he's not asleep in the boat. He's nowhere to be seen. They believe they're abandoned. But at this wonderful mystical time of dawn, when the sun is just beginning to paint the clouds a little purple and lavender, then Jesus begins the walk. He's come down from the mountain. Yes, he's glowing with the power of God. And as the sun rises, Jesus rises in the distance, walking on the sea toward them. And their reaction is surprising, isn't it? They're scared of him. Because their mind can't get around that he's walking on the water. They're terrified. More scary than being drowned in the water is seeing their Lord, who they follow on the desert ground, nice firm ground, walking to them on the sea. And Jesus says, "Take heart, have courage, it is I. It is I is meant to be I am. Like at the beginning of the world, God created the heavens and the earth. Jesus, the I am of God, is recreating how we see the world with a focus on who is bringing God close to us, is Jesus. And then the most miraculous part of the story is not that Jesus walks on the water. It's that Peter, who always blurts out something that he doesn't think about, thank God for Peter, he says, if that is you, and I don't really believe it, tell me to walk over to you. Tell me to walk out there to you. And Jesus says one word. Come. And here's the miracle. The miracle is that Peter takes a step out of that boat with these roiling waves underneath him. It's still windy and turbulent. And he walks on the water. We forget that part. We wonder how Jesus does it. Wonder more how Peter does it. He walks on the water before the wind blows him a little off balance and he gets scared like a man on a tightrope. And down he goes, Peter the rock. And what do rocks do in water? It's a joke on his name. He sinks, just like a rock is supposed to. Just like we do when our heart sinks and our fears overwhelm us. Our heart sinks. And Jesus reaches out his hand, grabs him, and pulls him up. And together, they get into the boat. Now, what just happened was an exchange of power. Jesus touches Peter, raises him up out of his fears, and together they get back in the boat. And what do everybody in the boat do? What we're doing here in church? Truly, there is the Son of God. We worship him. That's what we're doing. We worship him in the church. They worship him in the boat. Jesus has passed the power to his disciples. Peter is the one who walked on the water, and he will continue to walk on the water like we do every time we go out the door and think, how in the world are we going to share this good news with everybody so that they believe what we believe, so that they take heart like we take heart, so that they can express their fears and have doubt and not push them away, but put them out on a platter and say, Jesus, it's overwhelming. I can't deal with this. Please come to me and walk right through it, and come to me in my need. And that's what we can ask as a community and as individuals. He is there for us. This symbol of standing on top of all of our dark fears never goes away. And we are always called to be pulled up out of them and have a community around us who shares our belief. So take heart. It is Jesus and not us that controls the fear.